Everyone in the room turned silent when my sister smirked and said, "You're just poor, and that's why no one takes you seriously." Her words hit harder than a slap, echoing in front of my whole family. Faces shifted between pity and amusement, and I felt the weight of every judgmental stare pressing on me. My sister leaned back in her chair, confident and proud, thinking she had crushed me in one single sentence. She always measured worth in money, jewelry, and the size of a house. She never understood that true wealth doesn't always show on the surface. I stayed quiet, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew something I did. Moments later, as the tension boiled in the air, the sound of heavy blades chopped through the silence. At first, no one understood what was happening. The glasses on the table shook. The curtains moved with the sudden force of wind. My sister frowned, confused, and then the unmistakable sound grew louder and louder. Thump, thump. I stood up calmly while everyone else rushed to the windows. And there it was, sleek, black, and shining under the Sun A helicopter descending right into the yard. Gasps filled the room. My sister's jaw dropped, her words choking in her throat. I didn't need to argue anymore. I didn't need to shout or prove myself with clever lines. The sight of that helicopter, waiting for me, spoke louder than anything I could ever say. I walked past my stunned family, my heart steady, my face calm, and for the first time, silence worked in my favor. She called me poor, but she had no idea that I was already flying far above her world. Family gatherings in my house were never about love, warmth, or the joy of togetherness. They were competitions disguised as dinners where everyone secretly measured each other's success. The table was not for food, it was for showing off. Who arrived in the latest car? Who wore the brightest jewelry? Whose children went to the most expensive schools? And whose house had the most polished marble floors? For as long as I could remember, my family had lived inside this strange world where money wasn't just money, it was respect, love, and worth. If you didn't have it, you were invisible. Or worse, you became the joke. And that was exactly the role I had been given. The quiet sibling. The one who supposedly never made it. The one who didn't talk about money because, in their eyes, I had none. When I arrived that afternoon, nothing felt different. My sister had already claimed the center of attention, sitting like a queen with her expensive bag carefully placed on the table so no one could miss it. Her laugh echoed too loudly. Her words carried too much pride. My cousins surrounded her, nodding at every story she told about her vacations in Europe and her husband's new business deal. I entered quietly, shaking hands with my parents, greeting the elders, and taking a chair in the corner. I didn't wear flashy clothes, only a simple shirt and black trousers, and I could feel the subtle glances sweep over me like whispers, some of them sympathetic, others mocking. My sister saw me, gave a brief smile, then turned her face away as if she had just seen a servant enter the room. That was her way of telling me I wasn't worth her attention. The conversations flowed, one after another, always circling back to money. My uncle spoke about buying a new plot of land. My cousin bragged about a luxury watch. My aunt complained about her cook demanding a higher salary just to prove she had a cook in the first place. I sat, silent, listening, sipping water while the laughter rose around me. I knew my place in these meetings. Speak too much, and I would become their target. Stay quiet, and they would forget I was there. For years, I had chosen silence, because silence protected me. But that day, my sister didn't want to let me escape so easily. She turned to me suddenly, her smile sharp, her eyes glittering with the cruel joy of a predator about to pounce. "So," she said loudly, making sure everyone's attention shifted toward me, "tell us, little brother, how's life these days? Still managing?" The pause before the last word was intentional. It wasn't a question. It was an insult, wrapped in fake sweetness.
The table chuckled.
My heart beat faster, but I kept my face calm. "Life is fine," I said softly, but that wasn't enough for her. She leaned forward, her voice rising. "Fine. Come on. Don't be shy. Tell us about your business. Or do you even have one?" Laughter burst around the table, some polite, some genuine. I smiled faintly and sipped my water again, refusing to rise to her bait. That only made her bolder. You know, she continued, you should learn something from me. Not everyone can afford the life I live, but maybe if you try hard enough, one day you won't be so poor. She said the word slowly, carefully, so that it burned into the air. The laughter grew louder this time. My cousins leaned back in their chairs, some covering their mouths, others openly smirking. My parents looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to defend me. They never stopped her before. They wouldn't start now. The word poor echoed in my chest, heavier than it should have been. For a moment, I almost let anger show, almost allowed myself to shout back, to throw my truth into their faces. But I stopped, because what was the point of words? Words were weak in a room full of people who only respected what they could see, touch, and measure. If I argued, they would laugh louder. If I explained, they wouldn't believe me. So I stayed silent. My sister smirked, satisfied, convinced she had won once again. Then it happened. At first, it was faint, a low hum in the distance, like thunder, rolling across the sky. No one noticed it, too busy laughing and sipping tea. But then the sound grew louder, a steady rhythm of thump, 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 shaking the glasses on the table. The laughter stopped. My aunt frowned, my cousin stood up, and my father looked toward the window, puzzled. The sound became deafening, filling the whole room. The curtains blew inward as if pushed by an invisible storm. My sister's smile faltered, confusion spreading across her face. She turned to me, and for the first time that day, she didn't look superior, she looked uncertain. The blades appeared first, slicing the sky with power. Then the body of the helicopter descended, sleek and black, gleaming under the sun as it hovered just above the garden. Dust and leaves flew in every direction, and everyone rushed to the windows, shielding their eyes from the wind. Gasps filled the room. "A helicopter?" my uncle muttered, disbelief in his voice. Who could it be?" My sister stood, frozen, her lips parted, her pride melting away with each passing second. I rose from my chair slowly, calmly, while the sound thundered outside. Every pair of eyes followed me. My sister tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in her throat. "Don't tell me." "That's yours," she whispered, though her voice shook. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked to the door, pushed it open, and stepped into the roaring wind. The pilot stood waiting near the helicopter, saluting me with respect. I nodded back, my heart steady, my face calm. The world behind me was silent. In that moment, I realized the truth I had known all along. Respect doesn't come from words. It doesn't come from proving yourself in arguments. It comes from letting your actions speak. My sister had spent years trying to crush me, to make me feel small, but she had never understood that real power doesn't need to be shown, it reveals itself when the time is right. And that day, in front of the family that had laughed at me, mocked me, and pitied me, my silence was broken not by words, but by the sound of a helicopter's blades cutting through the sky. As I climbed into the aircraft, I glanced back one last time. My sister stood in the doorway, her pride shattered, her mouth open but no words coming out. The same people who had laughed at me minutes earlier now stared in awe, their eyes wide, their whispers trembling with disbelief. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply closed the door behind me, and as the helicopter lifted into the air, I looked down at the shrinking figures below. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet sibling anymore. I was the one above them, literally and figuratively, and nothing they said would ever drag me down again. The helicopter's blades roared above me, yet inside the cabin there was an almost eerie calm. The leather seats absorbed the vibrations. The tinted windows softened the furious sunlight, and the hum of the engine became a steady background. Rhythm! I leaned back, finally able to breathe away from their judging stares. As the house below shrank into a tiny square of brick and marble, I felt a strange mix of relief and pain. Relief, because I had finally shown them a glimpse of who I truly was. Pain, because it had taken a machine in the sky to silence their laughter, when all along my silence carried a story they never cared to ask. I stared at the fading rooftops, remembering how many times I had sat at those family tables, shrinking into myself, pretending their words didn't cut deep. They always thought my quietness meant defeat. But the truth was, I was building something so much bigger than their shallow world of gossip and gold chains. I thought back to the beginning, to the nights when I barely slept, working 2 jobs, while studying, stacking coins, while others stacked insults. Nobody knew about the hunger I endured, the sacrifices I made, or the countless times I chose discipline over comfort. My sister, with her glittering rings and her polished nails, never saw the nights I stayed awake, planning a future she couldn't imagine. She never saw the empty fridge in my tiny apartment, or the loans I juggled, or the moments when I almost gave up. All she ever saw was what I allowed her to see: a plain shirt, a calm face, and silence. She mistook that silence for weakness, when in reality it was armor. The empire I had now, the businesses, the investments, the partnerships wasn't handed to me like her jewelry was handed to her by her husband. I had built it, brick by brick, with patience sharper than her words. The pilot glanced back through the mirror, his eyes respectful. "Destination, sir?" he asked, though he already knew. I told him the name of the city where my latest project was growing a skyline that I was helping to shape. A business district where my name was written into contracts worth more than my entire family's possessions combined. As we flew, the view below shifted from green fields to highways, from scattered villages to sprawling cities. Each landscape reminded me of the distance I had traveled in life, not just in miles but in spirit. My sister still thought in terms of handbags and holiday pictures, but my mind was on building schools, funding hospitals, and creating opportunities that stretched beyond family dinners and cheap mockery. Yet even in the safety of the sky, her words replayed in my mind. "You're just poor." It wasn't the insulted self that hurt, it was the years of dismissal behind it. I wondered why I still cared what she thought. After all, I had proven myself to the world. 2 strangers who respected me to business. Partners who shook my hand firmly and trusted my word. But family is different. With family, the scars are deeper. No matter how high you fly, their words can still reach into the past, pulling you back into the small child who was told he wasn't enough. I closed my eyes and promised myself that this cycle would end with me. I would not let their poison define me anymore. The helicopter landed on the rooftop of one of my properties, a tall glass tower that pierced the clouds. My team was already waiting, a group of men and women in sharp suits, holding tablets and documents, greeting me with the respect I had earned. I stepped out, the wind whipping my clothes, and in that moment, I was no longer the quiet sibling at a family meeting. I was the man in charge, the leader, the one they turned to for decisions. My assistant handed me a file. "The investors are ready, sir," she said. I nodded and walked toward the conference room, where deals worth millions waited to be signed. But even as I slipped into the rhythm of business, a part of my mind remained anchored to the house I had left behind. I could almost see my sister's face, pale and frozen, her arrogance crumbling as the helicopter lifted. I imagined the silence in that room after I left, the whispers, the shifting eyes, the way my parents might have exchanged uneasy glances. I wondered if she regretted her words, or if she was already planning how to twist the story, how to make herself the victim of my sudden showing off. That was her way, never admitting fault, always painting herself as the star. Still, a quiet satisfaction bloomed in me. For once, I hadn't needed to raise my voice or argue. For once, the truth had been undeniable. The meeting with the investors was long, but successful. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, and futures were sealed. When it ended, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glowing city beneath me. Lights flickered like stars on the ground, cars streamed like rivers of fire, and somewhere in the distance, another helicopter cut across the sky. I thought about Pawnat, the shallow kind my sister worked, but the real kind, the kind that builds, transforms, and lasts. I wanted to use mine not for revenge, not to throw wealth in their faces, but to rise so high that their words could never touch me again. Yet, as night fell and the city lights glittered brighter, a thought gnawed at me. Could I really leave them behind? Could I ignore the sting of their voices forever? Part of me wanted to return one day, not with helicopters or wealth, but with a calm truth that would pierce deeper than any display of money. I wanted them to see that my worth wasn't in what I owned, but in what I had become. But another part of me doubted they would ever understand. For people like my sister, truth was measured only in gold. And so, I stood there, torn between the man I was and the boy I had been, between the life I had built and the family that had never believed in me. As I prepared to leave the building, my assistant approached again. "Your sister has called 3 times," she said carefully. I froze, the words hanging in the air. For a moment, I felt the old ache, the curiosity, the longing for her approval that I had carried for years. Then I exhaled slowly. "Teruha, I'm busy," I said, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. She would not let this go. She would call again, not out of love, but out of pride, out of fear, out of desperation to reclaim the throne she thought she had lost. And when that time came, I would have to face her, not as the quiet brother she mocked, but as the man I had become. The phone rang again the next morning, and though I had ignored her calls the night before, this time I let it buzz on the desk for a moment before I finally picked it up. There was silence at first, then her voice, strangely softer than I remembered, though still carrying that sharp edge she could never hide. "We need to talk," she said, not asking, but commanding, as if she still believed she had some power over me. I paused, letting the weight of her words hang between us, then agreed to meet, not at the family house, where she ruled like a queen, but at a neutral place, a quiet cafe in the city, where my face was not her audience's amusement but my own reflection in the window. When I arrived, she was already there, dressed in her best, with makeup carefully painted to hide the sleepless night she must have endured. Her eyes flickered nervously when she saw me, and for a moment I thought I saw something almost human in them, uncertainty, maybe even fear, but then her mask returned, and she crossed her arms, ready to perform. "You embarrassed me yesterday," she started, her words quick, almost trembling. "You didn't have to do that. Bringing a helicopter? Showing off like that in front of everyone? What were you trying to prove?" I sat down calmly, folded my hands on the table, and looked at her. Really looked at her. For years I had seen her only as the tormentor, the one who mocked and ridiculed me, but now I saw the cracks beneath her polished surface. Her hands were restless, her lips pressed too tightly, her eyes darting around the cafe as if afraid of being overheard. I let her speak, and she poured out words that shifted between anger and desperation. "You've always been jealous of me," she accused, her voice rising slightly. "That's why you stayed quiet. That's why you never showed anything. And now, suddenly, you want to make me look small? You wanted to humiliate me, didn't you?" I leaned back, letting her storm, my silence stronger than any argument. Finally, I spoke, my voice even, steady. "I didn't humiliate you. I didn't say a word. You did that to yourself." Her face flushed, and for once, she had no quick reply. The truth in my words pierced through her performance. She took a shaky breath, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. "So what is it? Where did you get all this? A helicopter? Properties? You?" Her tone carried both disbelief and greed, as though she couldn't accept that I had built something without her knowing, without her permission. I looked at her for a long time before answering, and in that silence, memories flooded back of when we were younger, when she used to laugh at my old shoes, when she compared me to her friend's richer brothers, when she whispered to relatives that I would never be anything. Back then, her words had cut me deeply. But now, sitting across from her, I realized they had also shaped me, hardened me, and pushed me into the man I had become. "I worked," I said simply, my voice carrying no boast, no explanation beyond the truth. "I worked while you laughed. I sacrificed while you showed off. And I built everything you never imagined I could." She blinked at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for something clever to say, but nothing came. For the first time in my life, I saw her speechless, yet beneath her silence, I saw something else. Feared that her throne, her carefully built illusion of superiority, was crumbling. Feared that the brother she mocked was no longer beneath her feet, but standing taller than she could ever reach. Then she tried a different tactic. Her voice softened, almost tender, though I knew it was another performance. "But we're family," she said, placing her manicured hand on the table as if reaching out. "You should have told me. We could have worked together. You and I. You shouldn't hide things like this from your own sister." I almost laughed. Not from humor, but from the bitter irony of her words. Family. She had never been family to me, not in the way that mattered. Family protects, family supports, family lifts you up when you fall. She had been the opposite, pushing me down at every chance, laughing at my struggles, enjoying my failures. And now, when she saw what I had become, she wanted to claim the title of sister again, as if it were a crown she could wear whenever it suited her. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes with a calm that unsettled her. "You never wanted to be my sister when I was struggling. You never stood by me when I had nothing. You only want to be my sister now because you see something you want." Her hand trembled slightly, and she pulled it back, her mask cracking. "Again." "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. She looked away, her eyes glistening, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she truly felt regret. But then, as quickly as it came, the softness vanished, and her pride returned. "Fine," she snapped, her tone sharp again. "Keep your secrets. But don't forget where you came from. You're still just you." I smiled faintly, not mocking, but almost sad. "Yes," I said, "I am still me. And that's exactly why you can't understand how far I've come." I stood up, leaving her sitting there, her pride in pieces, her voice calling after me but carrying no power anymore. As I stepped out of the cafe into the busy street, the city alive around me, I felt lighter than I had in years. The confrontation I had once feared was behind me, and I had not needed anger or revenge to win it. I had simply needed to be myself, the self she never believed in, the self she could no longer control. But as I walked away, I also knew this wasn't the end. My sister was not the kind to accept defeat quietly. She would scheme, she would twist the story, she would try to claw back the power she had lost. And I, for the first time, was ready, because no matter what storm she tried to create, I had already built my own sky. And in that sky, I was untouchable. The days after that cafe meeting were strangely quiet, and for a while I almost allowed myself to believe that my sister had accepted the truth and decided to retreat into silence. But deep down, I knew her too well. Silence was never her strength. It was only the pause before another storm. She had lived her whole life in control of the family narrative, shaping herself as the shining star. The example. The one others should admire. My sudden revelation had cracked that image in front of everyone, and I knew she wouldn't allow it to stay broken for long. I went back to my routine meetings in glass towers, flights across cities, conversations with people who valued results more than empty pride, but in the back of my mind, I could almost hear her voice, whispering, plotting, sharpening her words into weapons. I didn't have to wait long to see the first strike. It came in the form of rumors, subtle at first, floating through the family like smoke. My cousin called one evening, hesitating before asking if it was true that my wealth came from dangerous sources. Another relative sent me a message, politely suggesting that I should be careful because people were talking. I smiled when I heard it, not because it amused me, but because it was predictable. My sister couldn't attack me directly, so she went for the shadows, planting seeds of doubt in the soil of gossip, hoping they would grow into ugly weeds around my name. Instead of reacting, I chose patience. I let the rumors swirl, knowing that truth doesn't tremble when faced with lies, but patience doesn't mean blindness, and I watched carefully as she worked, attending family gatherings with exaggerated charm, pretending to be the victim of my so-called arrogance, painting me as a cold man who had abandoned his roots. She told anyone who would listen that I had changed, that success had turned me into someone unrecognizable, someone who no longer cared for family. I knew her game. If she couldn't rise higher, she would try to drag me lower, hoping to blur the memory of the helicopter that had silenced her once. Yet the more she spoke, the more desperate she appeared. Her laughter too loud, her stories too polished, her performance trembling at the edges. But it wasn't just words she used. One evening, as I left my office, I noticed a familiar car waiting across the street. It wasn't coincidence. It was surveillance. Subtle but clumsy. Someone trying to watch me, to learn something they could use. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I simply noted it. My instincts sharpening, reminding me that wealth and power always attract envy, and envy rarely stays harmless. I tightened my circle, reminded my team to stay alert, and focused on my work. But inside, I felt the weight of something darker brewing. My sister's jealousy had crossed from words into action, and though she lacked the skill to fight me in the world I lived in, she had the recklessness to cause chaos anyway. Still, life didn't stop. My days stretched into nights filled with boardrooms, negotiations, and visions of the future I was shaping. Sometimes, when the city was quiet and I was alone in my high-rise apartment, I thought about the irony of it all, how a boy once mocked for having nothing had built a life so vast, while the sister who once wore her wealth like armor was now clawing in the shadows, unable to accept defeat. There were moments I almost felt pity for her, moments I wished she could let go of her obsession and simply live. But then I remembered her voice at that family table, sharp and cruel, and I knew pity was wasted. Some people are so trapped in their hunger for control that they can never be satisfied until they destroy themselves or someone else. It was during one of those quiet nights that I received an unexpected call from my father. He rarely called me directly, preferring to let my mother pass along messages, so when his name appeared on my phone, I knew it wasn't casual. His voice was tired, carrying a heaviness that told me he had been pulled into my sister's storm. "Your sister says you've changed," he began slowly, avoiding accusation but hinting at disappointment. "She says you no longer care about family, that you only care about showing off. Is this true?" The old me, the younger me, have panicked, rushing to defend myself, desperate for approval. But now, I simply listened, then answered with calm clarity, "I haven't changed, Father. I've grown. She doesn't recognize it because she doesn't want to. I care about family, but not about games. I will never play her games again." He was silent for a long time before sighing. "Be careful," he said quietly, and then the line went dead. Those two words lingered in my mind. Be careful. It wasn't just a warning about her, it was about the path ahead. Success doesn't just attract envy from family, it draws it from strangers, competitors, even those you thought were allies. I knew my sister's voice was loud in the family, but in the world beyond, I had to ensure my foundation remained unshakable. So I doubled down on my work, secured my partnerships, and expanded cautiously but firmly. And all the while, I felt her shadow trying to follow me, her whispers turning into louder claims, her schemes becoming bolder. The breaking point came. At another family meeting, weeks after the helicopter had landed in their memories like a ghost that wouldn't fade. I almost didn't attend, but something in me wanted to face it. To stand in that room not as a victim but as myself. When I entered, the atmosphere was heavy, eyes dotting between me and her, as if everyone was waiting for another scene. My sister sat straight-backed, her smile wide, her words dripping with fake sweetness as she greeted me loudly, almost theatrically, so the entire room would hear. "Ah, our successful brother has arrived. I hope you're not too busy flying around in helicopters to sit with us ordinary people." The laughter that followed was hesitant, not as full as before, but enough to show she still had some hold on them. I didn't answer. I simply sat down, letting the silence speak for me. Throughout the meeting, she kept poking, little comments about money, about arrogance, about betrayal of family values. Some laughed, others stayed silent, but all eyes were on me, waiting to see if I would break. I didn't. I let her words hang in the air, heavy with their own emptiness. And then, at the end, when the tension was almost unbearable, I stood up and spoke, not to her, but to the room. My voice was calm, steady, carrying no anger, only truth. I have never forgotten where I came from. I have never stopped being family. But respect is not built on mocking others. It's built on support, on honesty, on loyalty. If that is too much to ask, then perhaps the problem is not me. The room fell silent, heavier than ever before. My sister's face tightened, her smile frozen, her hands clenching under the table. She had wanted to control the narrative again, but I had shifted it without raising my voice, without attacking her directly. I saw the uncertainty in the eyes of my cousins, the discomfort in my parents' faces, the cracks beginning to form in the wall she had built. For once, she had no reply, and in that silence, I understood that her war was not over, but the battlefield had changed. She could no longer laugh me away, no longer dismiss me with a single word. Now, she had to confront the reality she had denied for so long. When I left that night, I knew she would fight harder, dig deeper, and perhaps even cross lines she hadn't before. But I also knew something more powerful I no longer feared. Her? The boy who once shrank at her words was gone. The man who had risen beyond them was here, and whatever came next, I was ready. The storm finally broke one evening when my sister decided she could no longer bear the cracks in her carefully constructed crown. She called another family gathering, insisting it was for peace, for togetherness, though everyone knew she wanted a stage. When I arrived, the atmosphere was already heavy, the air thick with whispers and unease. She sat at the center of the room like a queen holding court, her smile sharp, her eyes cold, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she welcomed me. I could feel every gaze fixed on me, not with mockery this time, but with expectation. They all sensed that something was about to happen, something bigger than the petty insults of the past. My sister wasted no time. "We're worried about you," she began loudly, making sure every ear in the room caught her words. "You've changed. You've become arrogant, secretive, obsessed with showing off. You fly in helicopters, build towers, and forget your roots. Tell me, brother, what are you really hiding? Where did all this wealth come from? Are you as honest as you pretend to be?" The gasps and murmurs rippled through the family like waves, some leaning forward in curiosity, others shrinking back, afraid of what might unfold. I remained seated, calm, while her words tried to circle me like wolves. Inside, I felt the old sting, the familiar ache of being accused, but this time, it didn't reach me. I knew who I was, and no storm of lies could drown that truth. I stood, slowly, letting silence settle until every voice fell quiet. My eyes swept across the room, meeting each face my parents, my cousins, my uncles and aunts' faces that had once looked at me with pity or ridicule, now watching with uncertainty. Finally, I turned to my sister. "You speak of arrogance," I said evenly, my voice steady but firm. "But what you call arrogance is simply silence, refusing to be crushed. You speak of secrets, but the only secret I ever kept was my strength. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew this family would never measure worth in anything beyond gold and glitter. You call me dishonest, but it is you who has lied to yourself, to them, to anyone who would listen, because you cannot stand that the brother you mocked has risen beyond your reach." My words cut through the room like a blade, not sharp with anger, but heavy with truth. She tried to interrupt, her face flushed, her mouth trembling with rage, but I didn't stop. "You ask where my wealth comes from? It comes from work? From nights without sleep. From sacrifices you never saw because you were too busy laughing at me. From building, not destroying. From lifting, not mocking. Everything I have is earned, and everything you have tried to take from me has only made me stronger." The room was silent, the weight of my words pressing down. My mother's eyes glistened. My father looked away, ashamed perhaps of all the times they let her cruelty pass without stopping it. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, no longer laughing, no longer sure of the ground they stood on. My sister, however, refused to yield. Her pride was too deep, her throne too fragile. She stood, her voice rising, cracking under the strain. "You think you're better than me? You think a helicopter makes you more important? You'll never be, family. Again. You've betrayed us all, abandoned us for strangers who only care about your money. You may have fooled them, but I know you. You're still that boy I called poor, and no matter how high you fly, you'll never escape that." Her words hung in the air, trembling with venom, but they no longer reached me. I stepped closer, not with anger, but with a calm that unsettled her more than any rage could. "You're right," I said softly, so softly the room leaned in to hear. "I will always be that boy. The boy who was laughed at. The boy who was called poor. The boy who was pushed down. That boy is still in me, and I thank you for it. Because without him, I would never have learned to rise. Without him, I would never have built what I built. Without him, I would never have known that worth is not given, it's created. My voice grew stronger, filling the room. You tried to bury me with your words, but you never realized I was a seed, and seeds don't die in darkness. They grow. For the first time in her life, she had no reply. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide, her mask shattered. The family sat frozen, caught between the weight of her pride and the undeniable truth of my words. In that silence, I knew the war was over, not because she surrendered, but because she had nothing left to fight with. Her weapons mockery. Ruma's pride had dulled against the armor I had forged from years of struggle. I turned to the rest of the family, not to claim victory, but to end the cycle. I don't need your approval, I said, my voice softer now. I don't need your praise. I only ask for respect. And if that is too much, then I will walk away and never look back. But no, this I will not let anyone define me again. Not even family. I walked toward the door, and as I did, something strange happened. No one stopped me, no one mocked, no one laughed. Instead, I felt their eyes following me with a mixture of respect and shame, as if they finally saw me for who I was, not for the shadow my sister had cast over me. When I reached the doorway, I glanced back one last time. My sister stood there, pale, trembling, her eyes wet though she would never admit it. She had spent her life building a throne of pride, and in one moment, it had crumbled into dust. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply left because my victory was not in her defeat, but in my freedom. Outside, the night air was cool, the city alive with lights and movement. My car waited, my driver opening the door with quiet respect. As I slid into the seat, I looked up at the sky, the same sky my helicopter had once cut across, and I realized something profound. It was never about proving her wrong. It was never about showing off or silencing her with wealth. It was about reclaiming myself, about breaking the chains of words that had held me down for so long. She had called me poor, but poverty is not the absence of money, it is the absence of belief. And I was no longer poor, not because of helicopters or towers, but because I finally believed in who I was. As the car drove away, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. The family house, the laughter, the insults, all of it faded behind me, shrinking into the distance like shadows at dawn. I didn't know if they would ever truly respect me, or if my sister would ever let go of her bitterness. But it no longer mattered. My journey was not tied to their approval. My worth was no longer chained to their opinions. I had risen, not above them, but above the need for them to see me. And in that freedom, I had won. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more powerful and twisted stories every week.